All right. So these are two speeches by Dr. Anthony Fauci, who you've probably all heard of by now, but he has been the head of the U.S. government's COVID response. These are two example speeches that really illustrate what I'm talking about with audience and how the different audiences change how someone is going to talk about a certain topic. So Dr. Fauci is speaking about COVID in both of these speeches, but it really changes the language that he uses based on each one. So I encourage you to watch both of these slash read them because this first one, he's addressing an audience of experts at this the National Institute of Health's COVID Summit. So you can see how he uses scientific medical jargon in this speech because he doesn't have to care about the average person understanding him. All of these people are medical experts. They know what he's talking about. And he is very much, clinical and just, focused on getting these scientific facts out there. And then we've got this interview with him on CBS News, where it's average people like you and me watching this video or this speech. And so the language he uses changes, and he stops using so many big words and all this medical jargon so that the average person can understand him. And he definitely starts appealing more to emotions than he does in the speech at the National Institute of Health Summit. So that's a really good example of what I'm talking about with audience there. The next part of the rhetorical situation is the genre or medium. So there are a lot of different kinds of persuasive rhetoric. There's written rhetoric, like books or letters, texts, emails, all of these things. There's visual, like art or movies and, even YouTube videos. There's oral, as in speeches, what we're doing for this assignment. And, the oral part, the auditory part of videos, or there's also podcasts. And I would say certain mediums connect a lot better with certain audiences. You, as if you're a member of Gen Z, probably don't watch a lot of cable TV because we tend to watch Netflix or Hulu or YouTube or something instead. And so advertisements that are on cable TV probably aren't going to reach you. But if it were an ad on, Hulu or YouTube, it might reach you a lot easier. Or a lot of advertisers now use sponsored Instagram posts instead to reach the Gen Z generation. Even something like a podcast is probably going to really reach the millennial or Gen Z audience a lot more effectively than it would, the baby boomer generation, because they tend to, stay away from too much internet, too many podcasts. And when you're thinking about genre or medium, you also think about genre conventions. So these are characteristics that are shared in general between works of the same genre. So for a speech, since that's what we're focusing on for this unit, these genre conventions tend to be that most speeches are made to persuade an audience. The purpose of a speech is usually to persuade. The language in a speech usually changes according to who the audience is. So it might be really formal and professional, like Dr. Fauci's speech at the NIH, or it could be really informal and funny, like an Oscars acceptance speech. And we'll watch one of those later on this unit. Most speeches are organized in kind of a similar way to an essay, where they have an introduction, at the very beginning that kind of pulls the audience in. Then they've got their main points in the middle, and a conclusion that gives the audience something to remember, something to take away. And most speakers will use hand gestures and voice projection, so meaning they're making their voice loud so it can project, across the whole audience. And some will use visual presentations as well. So those are all genre conventions that you want to think about as you're analyzing your speech. Is your speaker adhering to those conventions, or are they doing something wildly out of the ordinary? Are they singing during part of their speech? That would be pretty out of the ordinary. And then we've got stance. So stance is the attitude towards a topic. So you can think about stance as positive, negative feelings towards a topic, and you can find this stance by looking at the kinds of words they're using to describe the topic. So I've got here on the right an example of a tweet from former President Donald Trump about Congresswomen Omar and AOC. So you could read this tweet and look at the exact sorts of words that he's using to describe the women and their places of birth, or their families' places of birth, and the policies that they support. So he's talking about them as progressive Democrat congresswomen who originally came from countries whose governments are a complete and total catastrophe, the worst, most corrupt, and inept anywhere in the world. And then they're loudly and viciously telling the people of the U.S. Their policies. So at the very beginning here, you can see that he's using words like catastrophe, corrupt, inept, vicious. Those are all really negative towards these women and the policies they support and their places of birth. And then he moves into talking about the U.S. So we've got telling the people of the United States, the greatest and most powerful nation on earth, how our government is supposed to be run. So greatest, most powerful. The U.S. he describes as really positive. And then he goes on and says totally broken, crime-infested places from which they came. Again, very negative. And so you can tell that his purpose is obviously to elevate the U.S., say that the U.S. is a lot better than these other nations, and by association saying, oh, well, these women who come from these places that are so much worse than the U.S. have no right to tell us how the U.S. can become better. And it shows as stance towards these women and their, families, countries, is very negative, and his stance toward the U.S. is more positive. Okay, so if we were, for an example, looking at another speech, an actual speech this time, we could look at Barack Obama's words on climate change to kind of highlight what I've been talking about as far as the rhetorical situation goes. So you can read through this by yourself, and after reading it, look through here, and I've highlighted who the audience is, the purpose, and then look at the different words he's using in order to analyze, what he's trying to do with that. Okay, so as far as big picture, why is the rhetorical situation important even beyond your essay? Because I really do believe that it is one of the most essential parts of, being a conscientious citizen, and also, being a good college student. So you're going to have to use a rhetorical situation for every single assignment you have in the rest of your college career. thinking about your purpose. Why am I doing this? Who am I doing this for? With the audience, the genre conventions for this type of assignment. Am I doing a lab report or am I writing an essay? When you're trying to differentiate between those two things, you're looking at the genre conventions. You need to think about the tone you use for your assignments. Am I allowed to use I in this writing assignment? Am I allowed to be more informal? Do I need to be really formal and use, dictionary level words for this? And also medium. So like, how are you supposed to present this information? Is this a speech I'm giving for a communications class? Am I allowed to use a PowerPoint with this? So all of these questions you should be asking as you're completing your assignments so that you fulfill what your professor would like you to do, and ultimately succeed in your college careers. So you'll be practicing the rhetorical situation in the discussion board for this week, reading a Jasmine Ward essay on, what is it called? On witness and repair, and answering some questions about the rhetorical situation for that. And like I mentioned earlier, you will be submitting your topic for approval to me on Thursday. So those are your 2 assignments for Thursday. Don't forget to do your journal activity for Monday. Otherwise, if you have any questions about anything, as always, reach out to me through email and I'll get back to you. And I hope you have a great rest of your week.